Welcome to another episode of the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In our episode today, we are talking with Marie Sloan, who's a licensed professional counselor and certified perinatal mental health specialist based in Arizona. She focuses her practice on helping new parents of all backgrounds, but specifically focuses on LGBTQ plus families and non-traditional family dynamics, such as co-parenting, single parents by choice, queer parents, polyamorous families, and others. She herself is a survivor of postpartum depression and a single parent for 4 years, brings compassion and lived experience to parents adjusting to a variety of new dynamics and transitions. As you may already know, the conversations about queer parents and families in the perinatal mental health space is one that needs to be expanded. And Marie talks a little bit more about that in our interview. She shares with us a little bit of her parenting journey and how she supports families who are going through the transition to parenthood when not all parenting support spaces are created equal, specifically with families that might have a non-traditional path to parenthood where there could be pushback from people around them. Making sure that people have adequate support and being able to find that support is really, really crucial. Thank you for joining us in this conversation today. Let's meet Marie. Welcome, Marie. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm grateful that you're coming on to share the work that you do, specifically because, as you know, not enough people are, number one, specializing in perinatal mental health, but also perinatal mental health and supporting LGBTQ families. And so your work is uber important, and I'm grateful that you're coming on to share.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity because I feel like this is, there are so many, like, even within that, like, perimental health, like, umbrella, there's a lot of specific spaces under there that kind of further, like, it's nice to have people that just like, oh, okay, like this specific topic is a little different than this other person's experience. And so I am always encouraging people to find that kind of, not just the maternal mental health or perinatal mental health, but also something a little bit more specific to you.
Right, absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that, well, like I said, for one, perinatal mental health is a specialty and you can get that specialized support, but it can be as specialized as is available.
Yes.
And yeah, super duper important. So yeah, if you want to talk a little bit more about what your focus is and how you got into this work.
Absolutely. So I was when I had my son, and this was, like 10 years ago. My son's 9 now. The whole pregnancy process was very difficult for me. I did not like it. I didn't like being pregnant. I didn't like feel okay admitting that. That was really difficult. I was in a very unhealthy relationship at the time also, so that was contributing. I had a lot of depression and anxiety even before my son was born. And that only really compounded after the fact. And a lot of the trauma and just unhealthiness of that relationship really was based around my sexuality. And so that was like a huge sticking point. It was extremely codependent. It was just not very good. And I, unfortunately, at the time, because of the resources that were available to me, like I had graduated from college, but I've been working as an event planner and a server. Like I didn't really have as much direction as, you want to have when you get pregnant. It was an unplanned pregnancy. And so I had to navigate a lot of like, what am I going to do from here? While at the same time being kind of like underneath this like blanket of depression because of the environmental factors. And so I was not in the position to get some of the support that I needed. Like I did not see anybody when I was having postpartum depression. I did see my medical, like my OB did give me medication, and that helped a bit. But again, the environmental factors were still so present
Yeah.
that it was really difficult to feel any difference with the medication alone. And I did have a good kind of support system per se. Like my family was very supportive, but they were at the time were in a different state. And I had some friends locally, but I was the first one to have a child, like within my group of friends.
Right. That's its own hard thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard to find like that other mom to relate to, that like, you don't understand how tired I am. You know, like it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I just felt very alienated. I felt very alone. And that became part of the whole, you know, self-feeding thing with the codependent relationship. Like, I need to figure this out by myself, you know, like I decided to have this baby. I need to, you know, be okay. I need to have all the answers. And I felt inadequate a lot of the time, you know. I think as new parents, new moms, I always felt like I was doing it wrong, and I was always trying so hard, and I was just exhausted. Like,
yeah, it's really hard to keep going when you feel like that.
Yeah, and my son did not sleep at night. Like, he was born at like 8 p.m., so he was a little nocturnal there for a while. And because I decided to breastfeed, like, that was kind of like he was up at night eating a lot. And so I really did not know how to adequately take care of myself. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to advocate and ask for things. And I didn't really have a sense of community. So there was a lot of alienating factors that, as I grew and differentiated from the relationship, left the relationship because I, you know, kind of figured out I knew it was unhealthy, but I was like, okay, this is not going to be the thing. And I decided to go to grad school. I was attracted to counseling. I'd been counselors in the past. And I, again, unfortunately did not even have the resources at the time my son was born to re-enter that space.
Yeah.
But as I left the relationship, I was like, I need to go to counseling. And so I finally did get myself into counseling after I'd left the relationship. Got some family support to help with that. And then I was like, okay, when I think about my future, apart now that I'm a single parent, you know, and kind of all the pressure is on me. My son's dad was an active alcoholic at the time. So I kind of had to wrap my brain around, like, he might not ever show up. So I need to plan for, I need to plan for, I'm the primary, you know, and then if he gets his stuff together, awesome. But like, I don't want to count on that. I can't count on that. And even that added another layer of pressure, that now I'm a newly single parent, and I am, you know, I had to go to Al-Anon. I had to do all kinds of things to kind of get over that relationship. And counseling really was a boon for me. Like, that helped me reframe things, see things through a different lens, rebuild my own self-esteem, deal with the trauma around the sexuality aspect. And I decided, like, this is something that I want other people to have.
Nice.
I want to be a part of this, you know, because it was so nice to have an affirming space. It was so nice to have somebody there being like, oh yeah, like, that's very normal, you know?
Yeah, it's so important.
That it's, and especially it's nice to have somebody who's not necessarily been through the exact same thing you've been through, but who's been in that space and can actually be like, like, this is tough. Like, what you're doing is really hard, and it's really a lot harder to do it alone. And so then it also became like part of my healing journey to find those spaces for myself, to have a sense of community. Like, Al-Anon was great. I know 12-step is not for everybody. I also did some smart recovery. I did counseling, and then I also joined a new parents group back when I was in New Mexico for a little bit. Yeah,
it's a lot of support.
It was just nice to have. Yeah, it was nice to, but I felt like I had a lot of ideas about those resources, and then not everybody does. Like, I had parents who encouraged me to go to counseling. I had, been to counseling as a teenager when I was struggling with things. And so I think I understood that not everybody had that. And so sometimes it was going to be more important to be part of. Not everybody had that, like, encouragement. Some people are made to feel guilty or ashamed that they have to go to counseling,
Yes. Oh, it's like
that's
so terrible.
I know, like, if the idea, and I run into this with parents, and just in general, is like, if I need to go to counseling, I'm failing or I'm doing something wrong,
right?
That I should need this other person. And I'm always like, oh no, like, we all need help.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Exactly how I feel too.
You know?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I that was what kind of led me into this. I always knew I wanted to work with trauma. I always knew I wanted to, like, I do EMDR. I did not have a traumatic birth. I will just throw that out there, but a lot of people do. And that's a huge other aspect to this, offering this care. And a lot of people just don't have the support that I did. Even though I felt very isolated, I still had family. I still had, even though I was a single parent, eventually my son's dad did get sober, and he is very present. And so
nice.
I'm super grateful for that.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm proud of him.
Yeah.
And we're on very good terms. But, like, doing that as a co-parent, like, co-parenting is a very, like, neither of us knew how to do that, because neither of our parents were divorced. We both came from parents who stayed together. And so neither of us were very good at that at first. And we needed a lot of support. Like, we did some, not couples counseling, but co-parenting, coaching type stuff about how to communicate and how to, like, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, like, conversations to have with our son, in front of our son, and apart from our son. And so it's just been a very long journey for me, but I have really appreciated learning how to navigate that space from the professional from the professional side also, because I feel like it's one of those things where I'm constantly learning, and I even from my clients, and I think it's just, I'm really grateful for that too.
Yeah, for sure. And then going into, thank you for sharing all of that. And for, like, going into your sort of specialty, as we were talking about before, like, becoming more specialized. What are you hearing from people who find you and find your very specific focused support?
And right now, so when I was doing my internship and kind of looking for my niches, I was in the recovery field. Like, I did my internship, and my first job was in a rehab center. So substance use. But the cool thing about substance use was that it gave me the opportunity to work with lots of different populations.
For sure.
And I knew, again, from my experience, like, some of the clients that I resonated with the most were parents, both, all genders. And when I left during the pandemic, because that was a fun curveball that got thrown my way, that was my first year as a licensed clinician, was 2020.
Gosh.
Yeah, baptism by fire. I never saw myself entering the private practice space, but that was just a necessity, because I couldn't be full-time in person at this rehab center like I needed to be, because my son was at home. And everything was shut down, and, like, I couldn't go anywhere. And so I started doing private practice, and my supervisor there, one of her niches was working with trans folks. And in the state of Arizona, like, there just is not enough support. Like, we're still a pretty traditional state, pretty conservative. I mean, we've got a lot of influx from California over the last few years. But overall, there's not a whole ton of people who know how to work with that population. And being cis, like, I did not know how at first either. But she was really great about allowing me, like, got me some great trainings, people with lived experience, and I got to develop that skill set. And that's where I kind of felt those two things start to like be very present. Like, oh, I love working with members, not just of the trans community, but the LGBTQ community because of my experience, and that they're parents. Because again, there's that intersectionality of like, yes, I'm a parent, but then not all parenting spaces are LGBTQ friendly and like have training around how to talk about that, or even just non-traditional, like single parents and single parents by choice and polyamorous parents and people like that. So once I kind of found and worked with a couple of those clients, I was like, oh, this is the thing, like, that makes me feel energized and revved up, and like, you know,
I love that.
Really love working with this like intersection of these two populations. And it's kind of grown from there. I eventually left and started my own private practice and just like dedicated all my time to that. And I feel like ever since then, I have just really resonated with, and part of it is my website, but I think a lot of parents do reach out for that non-judgmental space. Like, I'm not going to, I kind of like speak their language a little bit, like I'm not going to frame their parenting journey through the lens of some of those more traditional things. Like, it's got to be a mom and a dad and all of those things. I'm a little bit more sensitive to, tell me about your family dynamic, tell me what's working for you. Tell me where you want to focus the work, as opposed to assuming like, oh, well, you're a polyamorous family, so there must be problems around that. No, like, that's not, I try to just approach everything with this. And I've done a lot of learning over the last 3 to 4 years about how to make that space affirming for all the populations I work with.
Yeah, I'm right. I mean, speaking a little bit more to that, maybe I'm going to make an assumption that folks who have maybe sought support or therapy and who've come across therapists who are not affirming might be extra excited to be able to work with you. Because it's right to use the words that you used before, like sort of you being able to speak their language or even understand their language, or just having a place that feels safe and affirming can be really hard to come by.
Yeah. And for a lot of my clients, like, finding me is, I always feel so great when they're excited about it, because they'll tell me, like, and I think a lot of clinicians, like, very, like, not maliciously, will just, they just haven't had that training, and they're like, oh yeah, I work with families, so this specific type of family, like, there shouldn't be any difference there, but there are. And I think kind of being aware of that is really important. And again, like, there's certain like experiences and life experiences that I have not had, and I have not had the training. And so, like, there's definitely some people who've approached me and they're like, well, I need this. And I'm like, ooh, I can't do that. And I wish everybody was a little bit better at saying, like, oh, this is what's going on. I'm not super informed about that. Because again, like, I tend to use that like very gender neutral language. I say parenting and parents instead of moms and dads. Even little things like that can make a huge difference for parents who don't identify as like mom. They identify as like, we are parents. And I think it's just not knowing those little nuanced things can just sometimes come across as invalidating by accident for certain family structures. Yeah. Or even like for my I have a couple of clients who are single parents by choice, like, just having people in their lives, and sometimes their counselors being like, why would you want to do this on your own?
Oh,
like,
gosh.
that can feel really like judgmental for them,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, tell me about what motivated your decisions. Like, tell me about your parenting journey.
Hmm.
As opposed to approaching this like, oh, it's supposed to be this way and you're doing it this way. Like, this is a huge thing. Um, so that can be part of it too.
You had mentioned before a little bit, like in your own journey, that you had supportive parents and a
Yeah.
supportive system. Um, but it can be also true that people who are having a, like you said, quote unquote, non-traditional path
Mm-hmm.
to having a family might not have that support from their
Yeah.
family. And
Mm-hmm.
like how I mean, that's a big topic, but how are you supporting people to navigate that?
So depending on the client, there's a lot of different answers to that. But one of the things that we do is examine like how that lack of support impacts their emotions and like learning how to take care of themselves. And sometimes there's trauma work around that, depending on the client. And then the other part that I always really encourage people to do is find local community support. And I know like during the pandemic, that was so hard.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was online. And honestly, for a lot of new parents, like that can be fine because you don't have to like pack everyone up or get a babysitter or whatever.
Yeah.
So honestly, this big push to have a lot of things accessible online is actually great for a lot
Hmm.
of parents. And there are certain areas that just have a lot more resources in terms of like affirming like transparent groups and or polyamory support groups for parents and the fact that that's online, they're not restricted to just their local community, so they can feel a part of a bigger community even though it's not an in-person experience. um, and I also encourage people to explore locally too, even if it's just, and a lot of these platforms will help connect you with, again, other people that are at least in the same city or the same state
Hmm.
as you, so
Hmm.
that you can feel a sense of, okay, well, we're not the only people, we might be the only people in our neighborhood who are a polyamorous family or a trans family or, a family with queer parents, but we aren't alone in, even if we have to drive like 30 minutes or an hour to hang out with these other families, we can still do that. So I always encourage people to explore their local and national like resources to that are specific to them.
Speaking from like a family culture perspective, if
Mm-hmm.
you grew up in a family that did things X, Y, or Z way, and you're creating a family that does things ABC way,
Mm-hmm.
you're like forging a new path.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out how to be a parent in like essentially a different way, a different culture, and that can be I mean that's really difficult. It's really difficult
Yeah,
to have to sort of like invent something new or try and parent in a way that you weren't taught.
absolutely. And that's what I hear from a lot of parents, is that even if it's something basic, like gentle parenting versus, they got spanked when they were younger.
Yeah.
Some of them really struggle with, I don't know what to do right now because this is how it was done,
Hmm. Hmm.
or people who grew up in like a faith of some kind and like they had that sense of community with their church, but now they've deconstructed or that wasn't the affirming space they needed. So they're like, what do we do to get that same sense of community? But I mean, like all of it, like the language that we use, the way
Mm.
that we talk to our children, the way that we discipline our children, the way that and now, of course, like what they eat, what they consume, like
Yeah.
screen
Oh, yeah.
time, all of those things. It's a big old ball of, we are forging a new path, and there's a lot of family stuff comes up.
Mhm.
A lot of confusion, a lot of just feeling like, am I doing this? Am I doing the right thing? And how do I do this thing?
Mhm.
Um, are really, really hard questions to be wrestling with on top of all the responsibilities of being
Right.
present and being a parent and,
For sure.
all the fun things. And that takes a lot of validation and it takes a lot of like, it's not an easy thing. for a lot
Mhm.
of parents to be in this space. And I think that's what's so important, is to recognize like there's so many different parenting experiences. They're all
Yeah.
valid. But there's a lot that goes into completely shifting the paradigm about how you're doing things versus like the way that, your schema for how
Mhm.
you were raised. Because that's where we do learn a lot about the world. That's where we do
Mhm.
learn a lot about how to be.
Mhm.
And so when we're challenging all that, it can really be a process for sure.
Yeah. You used a term, deconstructing, when you were talking about
Mhm.
kind of leaving a specific faith. Can you say a little bit more about what that is for people?
Absolutely. So deconstructing, and it does not have to be just about faith. I'll put that out there. It's a popular term for people who have grown up in a very specific um, worldview. We'll say that, whether it's
Mhm.
religious or whether it's political or whether it's,
Mhm.
like this is how a family should look, whatever. So when we get to be adults and we start to really differentiate from some of the original values that we were raised with,
Mhm.
people struggle with that. Like what is right and wrong, because we have a tendency to think in that like black and white space. And
Mhm.
so when I say deconstructing, like I use a lot of like rational emotive behavior therapy with people and ACT. So we get to, or acceptance and commitment therapy. So we get to really break down, these are the values. This is what was from my past. This is the way things were done.
Mhm.
What do I want
Mhm.
to bring with me versus what just doesn't apply anymore?
Mhm.
And so when I say deconstructing, I mean kind of really taking apart some of our internal structure and looking at it and examining it, and what parts are not applicable to us. And it's hard to challenge that because they stick with you, especially if you've been raised that like this is what a mother's responsibility is in terms of the family,
Mhm.
or this is how you should be as a wife, or this is whatever, as a father, whatever
Mhm.
the thing is. Um and so really kind of breaking that down to smaller pieces so that we can look at them and decide, okay, like what comes and what do we challenge and how do we do that? Because that's the
Mhm.
other part. It's very easy for us to look at something and be like, oh, that value doesn't really apply to me anymore.
Yeah.
And it's another thing to tell our feelings to
Mhm.
not care about that thing anymore,
Mhm.
or whatever, that we shouldn't be caring about that thing anymore. So that's where I do a lot of EMDR also, to help challenge some of those belief systems that might not necessarily be applicable anymore, or that are causing conflict within themselves or in their relationship dynamic, whatever it is. So that's kind of what that means.
Yeah.
Again, deconstructing is a very broad term that can mean a
Mhm.
lot of different things. This is my therapy cat, Bogey. Um, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people, but that to me, when I look at deconstructing, it's about understanding the old things and what's causing conflict in today's world, or today's like how we're functioning, and how
Mhm.
do we reconcile all of that.
Mhm. Going back specifically, I guess, to the population that you're supporting and that intersection with
Mm-hmm.
perinatal mental health, I'm curious from your perspective, what you've seen, where are we lacking? What are the holes in perinatal mental health and support for LGBTQIA families and resources
Mm-hmm.
and training? Whatever it is you see, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great question. And I think that we are getting better a little bit. Like I did the postpartum support international training as my basis for, like my PMHC, that's the certification that you get. And within that, I felt like they did a very good job of touching on a lot of these different areas. Like there's a lot of like people of color have a different like challenges, and their support that they need might be very different from somebody who is not a member of that community. And the same is true for the LGBTQ community, even within that umbrella.
Hmm.
Like queer parents, having a space for queer parents who are cisgendered is a little different than having a space for trans parents specifically, or non-binary parents, like people who are gender fluid. and how that relates to, and then again, there's the polyamorous, and that can kind of overlap with all of these things. And so I think really like it's good that we're doing the broad training about how to identify, some of the bigger topics under the perinatal mental health umbrella. But then I think really making more training available for clinicians and making more resources available, like, or at least like in the spaces that are there. So like if a trans parent needs financial help, like making sure that the people who are in that space have been trained on how to talk with them in an affirming way. And it doesn't have to be like super in depth, but even just, again, kind of learning to share some of the language. And I know, again, like this is a delicate topic because there's been it's been a very controversial topic in the news areas and like, social media stratospheres, but even learning things like just learning how to speak in gender neutral language versus like mom and dad and assuming that that's how everybody is. So I think that even though this has become highly politicized, for me, when I see the parents coming to me that need support, they don't even want that much. They just are like, I want to be able to go into a support group for parents and just have people recognize that not every parenting looks like this. And so I think it's getting better with the visibility. It's getting better with us learning a little bit more. But I think I always cringe about the politicization of everything because I'm like, so much of this, like people are just looking for resources and help as parents. They're not even thinking politically. Like they're not even, like you have to see everything my way. They're just like, I want to be able to go into a space and talk about what's going on with me without feeling judged. And I think that is where we're really kind of lacking in the mental health field. And I think there's a lot of contributing factors to that, but just like being able to spread some of this in a very neutral way is, I think, one of our biggest challenges, is that it's not about like right or left or right or wrong or any of that. It's just about like, we need to learn how to make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable that you can come here. And if we can't, because it's so hard to provide like individual spaces for all of the lived experiences out there. So even just making the spaces that we have feel more inclusive we're getting better. There's always room for improvement, like we're not there yet.
Right.
Sure.
So you were saying using inclusive language. But are there other, well, I mean, aside from going into like a full, like, let's train people right now kind of a conversation, like this is how you do it. It's not specifically like, 2 to 3 minutes worth of a conversation to change everything. But if people who are listening are thinking, I'm thinking of therapists, maybe doulas or support people, to pregnant and postpartum folks. Like, what are some things that they could do to start creating more inclusive space or using more inclusive language, or like even just resources?
Yeah. And I think that's a great question. And I always say, like, taking some even basic, like there's a lot of people with lived experience, like with the trans community or with queer communities that do offer training. And I think this is one of the big things that people really, I think, need to understand, is that if we have a friend who, let's say, identifies as trans or identifies as a single parent by choice or a polyamorous family, it gets very stressful for them to be constantly educating all the people around them about how they need to be treated. And so I always encourage people to say, hey, how can I support you in an affirming way? And what should I read? Where should I look to get some ideas of how to educate myself about that? And sometimes it might require you to do a little bit of like research on your own about this, instead of just making our assumptions about it. Like, what is the polyamorous family? Like, are there books I can read about that? The gender Gender Bible is an online resource that I point people to a lot. They have a lot of just like 101 things. Like this is, but I think even just Googling like trans or anything like lived experience for trans parents, like what will pop up, and just learning how to kind of educate yourself a little bit. I always say like go with lived experience, because you want to learn from the people who have been there, that this is my experience, this is how people are affirming for me. Like, or even again polyamorous families or whatever the space is, doing a little bit of research about what the specific like books or everybody has a website, right? Like there's the Trevor Project for trans youth. Like there's 1 in 10 for kids here in the state of Arizona who identify as queer. There's like a bunch of resources. So many of them are like state and local, like grassroots type things. So even just Googling a little bit of like, how can I support my trans parent friend? And just doing a little bit of a deep dive into that before you approach them with, hey, tell me how you know, like explain this to me, because that's one of those big things that can become like me having to like educate you on how my experience and all that. Like some people are absolutely like willing to share, like, yes, this is the thing, and this is how we do things,
Sure,
language we use. But I think it's good for people, if they want to learn how to support members of those populations, to really like dig in and be ready to maybe shell out a little bit of money to pay these people for their training or consultation, like for doulas and for like lactation consultants and people in that space. I always encourage them to look for like lean on their resources and look for training about how to do that and be ready to pay for it. Or there's, you know, I'm a member of this group called the Arizona Mental Health Providers. I mean, it's just like a Facebook group, and I will throw out there every now and then, like, hey, I really need to do a training on this topic. Who's created one? Like, I'd rather support somebody, a clinician who has created that, and then, you know, go to PESI or whatever, which is, you know, fine. But I always encourage people locally to try to find some of those consultations or trainings that are specific to whatever they're looking at, like whatever population they're looking to expand into. Get some training around that, do some research, try to find those spaces is important. And again, like if it doesn't exist, maybe like how can we advocate for that? Because that's a lot of people's thing too, is they're like, there isn't this thing for me, and then they create it, and then they find other people, which I've had a couple of clients do. Like they've created Reddit pages or stuff, you know, like things like that, where they can find that community. And so that's kind of probably what I'll end that.
Well, thank you so much, Marie, for coming on and sharing your experience and your work and your passion with us. And I hope that the people who are listening are inspired to go and do that research and look into ways they can support community better.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about everything I talked about today.
To connect with Marie, go to mariesloancounseling.com or on Facebook at Marie Sloan Counseling. I thank you so much for joining us today. As usual, please do share this conversation with everybody, and specifically anyone who you know could benefit from hearing our chat today. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.